Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast brought to you by Jointflows. Today we're joined by Steve Vinall, who is the founder of Coach Communications. Thank you for joining us, Steve. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you. It's what is it, the 12th of September, based in the UK, and it is freezing. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely.
Like winter is just suddenly
Yeah,
coming. Like,
the weather's just dipped overnight. I know exactly when it was. It was exactly when school started last week for my
yeah,
kid. It
yeah.
decided to get cold. So there you go. But look, it's great to have you on the show. We always like to do a little warm up for our listeners. Everybody wants to know, who is Steve? How have you got to where you've got to?
Wow. Okay, that that could take me a long time. Um, so look, I guess the simple answer to that, I found myself in business to business communications. It wasn't something that I planned my whole life, but I think, you get one job and then you get another job and suddenly that's it. You've got your pigeonhole. But luckily it's a world I love. And so for the last 20 odd years, really focusing on business to business companies, technology companies as well has been another world I found myself in that again I love. Very fast moving, lots of change in it. And when I took communications, I started really focused on employee communications and engagement, and that was from a generalist marketer. My first kind of dedicated comms role was about internal comms and making sure businesses are aligned and people understand the goals of the business. Um, and over time, my remit expanded to then add in things like public relations and social media and analyst relations. And so and I've done that for a number of large and small business to business companies. Um, and generally, found the same thing through all of those companies is that the thing that I enjoyed most was coming in and building, repairing, designing a function that operates and delivers on business objectives. Once I've done that, I found that my role largely became very politic based, and you get the team and everything up and running, and then your time is spent with meetings about meetings about meetings. And so this year I decided to set up my own business called Coach Communications, and really to help brands get their communications working better. And whether that is the build, repair, cut back, cut costs, or just help them get value from their investment in communication. So that's kind of what brings me to today.
Um,
Amazing.
that's awesome.
Quick,
Oh, sorry. No, you go, you
I
go.
was just going to say congratulations on starting your business as well. I know you said you've just recently started as well, and it's a major leap. So well done to you.
Do you know what's exciting? My first client bought me a present, which is this sign here, which has now got pride of place. So the minute I had a lit up
Amazing.
sign, I know I've made it. So I've got to
That's
stick with it
great.
now.
Steve, I caught you on a cold call. I was doing some cold calls, and you were really kind on the phone. So thank you very much. To start with, you wouldn't believe the amount of people who are awful on the phone to SDRs or whoever's calling them. So fair play to you. And the question I have is, before we get into this conversation, can you define communications for us?
Yes, of course I can. Yeah, it's a widely used term and can mean different things. Before that, the reason I'm always nice to people who call me out the blue is because for about 4 years when I was young, teenage young, I sold double glazing over the phone.
Ah,
And so this was proper old school. This was ripping a page out the phone book and literally dialing and ringing. And the amount of abuse I got every hundred calls, I would get sworn at 40 times. But you'd get that one yes. It taught me perseverance because you just
that's what keeps
keep
going.
going, keep going. So yeah, I'm a good karma. I'm always nice to people who call me.
Nice.
Communications, yeah, for the purpose of my
Yeah, the
business.
conversation. I think the audience we've got here might not be fully familiar
Yeah,
with
of
the ins
course,
and
of course.
outs.
So things like public relations. I'm sorry, I've left my phone not on silent. So sorry, guys. Um,
No worries.
Do not disturb.
This is where we'll shoot to advert.
All right. Okay, that's on. Yeah, communicate. So I'll start again in case you want to edit that, but I don't mind if you don't. So for the purpose of this, communications, it's things like public relations, getting your brand out there in the media. It's things like internal communications, making sure that your employees are aligned and engaged and understand what you're doing as a business. It's the channels that you take communications out, things like social media. But then there's some real kind of niche and specialist areas in there, things like analyst relations, working with the Gartners and the Forresters of this world.
Yeah.
Investor relations, helping secure investment and funding, customer communications. So really, the way I look at it, a company, a brand has something they want to say, and they have an audience that they want to say it to. The bit that fits in there for me are communication. How do you wrap that message up? How do you refine the messaging? How do you turn that to some form of content? And then how do you deliver it to the audience? So anything in that world is kind of where I'm used to operating and where I can help.
So I've got a follow-up question on this. There's been quite a lot of debates recently, and they're not fully official, but who owns LinkedIn accounts and the voice of your own profile, essentially, when you speak about your company's products? So to give you a little bit of context, we've got a lot of salespeople and sales leaders going on LinkedIn and creating their own brand. And often that obviously goes through what they're currently selling to their audience, which doesn't belong to them directly. They're just kind of part of a bigger company, right? And there's always a big gray area between, well, you shouldn't use this tone of voice, or you shouldn't speak with this vocabulary because that's not really in line with the corporate messaging and the corporate brand guidelines. But at the same time, they can't really tell you to do that because it's your own personal space. Like, what's your take on this?
Yeah. It's a big question, actually. I mean, there's a few answers to that. Personal branding it's really soared in popularity over the last few years, it feels, where more and more people popping up on LinkedIn. You always their picture and then some thoughts below it. Now I think for me, I think the perfect sweet spot, every brand should have a company page. And that needs to be, and I've got some research I can talk about the value of doing it this way, but you have a company page that is really clear and well curated on what it is that brand does, who they are, and then there's a regular flow anywhere between 2 and 5 posts a week that are for the audience, and that's the company speaking to the world. Now the sweet spot, if you can get to it, then is some sort of employee advocacy whereby you enable people who work at that brand to share that messaging, but apply their own tone of voice to it. So in its simplest sense, Jointflows puts out a post in the morning, and then all of your SDRs and sellers are hitting, sharing, and reposting with their own thoughts. That allows them to be authentic to themselves. It allows them to talk to their audience, but that message is being curated and approved by the right channels. And then taking that one step further, there's a number of platforms that will enable that at scale, and smart ones will even recommend other types of messaging that are similar, some ones that will come up with prompts and help people write their own thoughts. So I think that's the ideal, is you're able to manage the core messaging, and then you're able to allow people to apply their own messaging to it as they share. But it's a tricky one, I think social media is so personal, and I don't want any company telling me what I can and can't say on my own platform. But on the flip side, as a person who's normally managing the brand and the messaging, I don't want a load of sellers out there kind of putting their own personal spin on the brand. So it's a hard one to manage, but I think employee advocacy and a platform that can manage that for you is the best way to go.
Yeah, that's a great answer, actually. I know many moons ago I used to work at Procter & Gamble, And at the same time, over there, it was exactly the same. Facebook was the social media platform of choice for many people way back then.
Yeah.
But there were some individuals within our team who would make posts around products and things that have been launched into the market. And they used to kind of get told off and say, hey, you've got to take that down. Like, you're not supposed to be having this. This is not an official P&G account. You need to, take that down and keep it personal. So it's interesting that you say that. What I wanted to touch on was, when you described what communications is, to me, it seems like there's a natural path to follow, which is alignment required internally on what that messaging should be first. And if you get that right, then the outward facing communication should kind of trickle down from that, essentially. And for those who are listening and not seeing, Steve is nodding his head, so I finally got something right. My question to you is, how important is it to ensure that that alignment is there through the companies? And we touched through the company, and we touched on this slightly before we hit the record button as well. But what are the dangers of having misalignment from the top down? First, from a startup scale up operation through to those behemoth of companies as well.
Yeah, very important is the answer. And whatever the site, if any company are investing energy, money, any form of resources in putting a message in market, that is immediately wasted if you're not clear on what your message is and you're not aligned on that. So I mentioned when you asked me back about what constitutes communications, I mentioned internal comms, and I'd say of all the functions, that often gets labeled with being the fluffiest. My mates would constantly joke that my job was putting posters up in toilets and arranging family days, which I mean I've done. But actually, it feels furthest from the sales. I'd say things like social media, when you can attribute, well, this person saw this post, they clicked this link, they went here. Once you can attribute that to an account or a sale, that begin, people's ears prick up with that. PR, there's a very good way of attributing PR to sales now that's relatively new. Internal comms is really hard to do that. However, for me, it's arguably one of the most important, whether you've got 1 employee, 10 employees, 10,000 employees, making sure that they understand what the company is, the direction the company's going in, the role that they play in that, and then importantly, the challenge that company solves, what that company offers, and why. If you can get that right, and you can get every single person giving the same message, it's just so impactful on everything. To answer your question, you asked about why it's important. If I talk about why it's when it goes wrong, and I've seen this in some of the biggest companies I've worked at, where you've got that leadership team, and if you get them all separately on their own, and you say, in your own word, and I've done this as a project before, on a message project, where I've sat down with the entire every member of the C-suite and said, standard interview, who are we? What do we do? What do we value? What's important? What challenges do we solve? If you would see the level of misalignment there. Not everyone's got a slightly different spin on it. It's literally some of these people, we're solving completely different problems. And then when you think each of those is responsible for a team of up to 10,000 people, 5,000 people in each business unit. And they're the figurehead of that unit. They're the one that are doing the meetings and really sharing their vision through the organization. You can imagine how that cascades down, and then you end up with pockets of almost like working in a different company. And especially in a fast-moving tech company that has to pivot and change quite a lot to keep up with the market, and potentially has different product lines, it can be chaotic. And where that plays out is sales calls. You from the the initial outreach, through the SDR, through the sellers, through the technical sales teams, and so on. And these customers are like, well, hang on a minute, I thought I was here to talk about solving this problem, that you're talking about solving that problem. And then once they're sold to, handing over to a customer success team who think differently. So I think it's a very common thing not to have that in place. It's a fairly easy thing to fix that, and reinforce that constantly. And it's such a game changer in getting it right.
And that's something that we do well at Jointflows is we're constantly speaking about the messaging at a very regular cadence based on conversations we're having with prospects, with customers, and through the selling process itself as well. And we've seen quite a lot of iteration over the last 6 to 12 months, which have been significant and has had a direct correlation on our ability to close business as well. And it's just emphasizing how important it is that there's alignment in the messaging all the way through.
Yeah, and you said something really important there, which is it has to be a two-way process. This isn't about, the chief exec or the CMO coming up with a messaging and mandating that it's used. It has to be like, you have to understand how that's resonating in customer conversations, in prospect conversations, getting views from analysts, getting views from industry experts. It needs to be a really joined up process, and it needs to, you can't be changing messaging every single week, but it does need to evolve as the market around you evolves too. And that's another challenge, because if you change it too often, if you don't change it, you get left behind. And I think, this world where AI or generative AI kind of felt like it relatively happened overnight, those companies that haven't adapted to that messaging are left behind. But those that have, you get that cynical workforce, like, what are we selling this week? What's the big message that we're pushing this week? So there's a balance to be had with shifting.
Yeah,
I've
make you
got
better wait another week before you change the messaging again then.
I've got a lot of questions. So the first question I have is there's always a mess between, or frictions, whatever you call it, between pre-signature teams and post-signature teams. And it's always the same thing. Salespeople, whatever you call them, are pushing the envelope, and then CS or whatever you call them have to fix what has been sold and resell, and then kind of deliver on the new offering. That would be great to get your thought on this. I've got questions around those big quadrants leaders as well, and it's being debunked a little bit at the moment about the authenticity of their ranking and whether there's money involved or not. And I don't know if we want to get there or not, but what's your view on this? And the last question I have for you is around there's a big hype around product market fit, which I don't believe in. Like I don't think you ever fit a market, because the market is never static, if that makes sense. You always have competitions you have zero control over. They're changing the market. And then you have buyers who've got more or less maturity as the market grows, therefore the market evolves as well, and it's constant, right? So how can you fit into something that is never static? Yeah. So you can pick and choose whatever you want.
All right, I'll try and go.
What a question. It's like a three-part question.
Three-part
that
question.
weren't connected to each other either. They were all three different
Yeah, they're
subjects.
completely different topics. That's how we are all here. I was like, all right, what about this? Actually, should we go for lunch now?
Right. First question. So
So alignment.
seller selling a dream, customer success having to that dream. Yeah. I think company alignment is one thing, around getting clear on what it is you're selling. Kind of joint ownership. I know this, again, I don't want this to sound fluffy, but if you can build that culture and that environment where when the company wins, everyone wins, that's a real tricky but very powerful thing to have. So you haven't got that seller out there for his or her own gain and just, I'm doing this to hit my target to get my commission and so on. You've actually got them selling something because the customer needs it, because it will help the business grow. And they know that actually the customer CSM or the customer success can help upsell and grow that account. I think if you can build a culture where everyone is aiming for that, you will immediately eradicate that. But that's utopia, and that will often not happen. I think what if I can give my last company I worked at a shout out, which is Binder, which is a content management solution, and effectively they put a lot of investment into implementation. So, that handover between sales and into ongoing customer success, that was a really big team and really growing because they really proved their value. And at their best, they would be in the sales calls. They would understand the customer need from the out, or at the right time when things are looking like they might close, they would be in that process. And first of all, they'd be managing expectations about what that implementation looked like. As it, that might be a 12-week process. So a customer needs to know that from the outset that, well, hang on a minute, the minute you sign there, we're going to take you on this journey. They would talk through what that process looks like. They would be able to answer questions, and certainly they would be, if need be, holding a seller to some sort of account, because any promises that seller made, they were the ones that would need to deliver on that. And then equally on the other side, then there's that handover into customer success who would manage that account ongoing. And again, that was important to just keep that flow of information. Here's what's been promised, here's the problem we're solving, here's what they need, here's what they're worried about. And I think that implementation department really really made a huge difference in how and how accounts felt in those really important first few months. And that was always a point we asked for NPS and customer feedback at the handover from implementation to customer success. And we saw, our customers were so happy at that point because they'd been sold a reality, rather than, so they hadn't felt that jolt of the signature and the handover. So I think that's the best way I've seen it work in real life.
Like kind of blurring the lines between departments. I agree. I think the way you look at it is by taking the client's lens. Like, they don't actually care whether you've got 1 or 4 teams. What they want is to see the value that you've sold during the initial phase, and they shouldn't be exposed to having been handed over to Bob, to Jane, to being escalated to whoever. So I agree with this. It's really good.
I think second question, I think if I got it right, was around the Foresters and the Gartners and these big analyst houses, and the value and the process for categorizing brands and the value of doing that, and whether it's fake as well.
Well, yeah, I think there's been, back in the day, if you went on a quadrant or whatever listing, you went legit, and it was really hard to compete against the people who were on that listing. And the higher up they were, the more likely they were to actually just get more and more momentum. But it was never fully. The debate was always about whether they had the right product or the right people to speak to the team who was doing the listing. Yeah, I've got no experience on this. I've had experience as a seller, which was really frustrating because I was not on the leading side of the quadrant.
I mean, the value of appearing in those quadrants is huge. On the reputable ones, I'd say there's 4 or 5 big global players that kind of work across most of the tech industry. You've then got your niche players who may be just in a particular segment or a particular market that are still legit. There, just as an aside, there are then many others that, if I had £1 for every email I got that said, hey, we've listed you in our the leader, or whatever they decide to call that part of their report, and give us £100,000 and you can use this, and give us 120,000 and you can tell us exactly what to say. So there's a real kind of murky underworld, and brands that will basically build you a bespoke quadrant. Tell us what you think is important, tell us who your competition are. We will then rank you against them. So there's that whole world there. So I always I'll always look at any of those very carefully in terms of, for brands trying to sell me using one of those quadrants, I'd want it to come from a reputable firm. And I'm thinking of the Gartners, Foresters, 451, IDC. Those are kind of for me, the ones that are reputable. Now, in terms of getting on that, there's a couple of things. Look, your product's going to need to be, or your service or product, your offering is going to need to be pretty damn good for you just to appear as a leader without any input at all.
Yeah.
Now, all of these come with some sort of RFI that you need to fill in, and that can be anywhere from, I think the latest Forrester one I did was 11 quite open-ended questions, whereas an IDC one was a spreadsheet with about 15 tabs along the bottom and about 30 questions on each tab. So there's a process of filling it in to get in the report. Now, and it's kind of it's a standard thing. What you put in is what you get out of that. If you take that serious, if you've got a good offering, you take it seriously, get the right people involved, get it back on time, you're going to get a much better chance of getting that good position. So there is an investment of time to get in those reports. But having said that, I mean, for me, the reports are just part of an ongoing conversation with those analysts. I think the reports almost should be a byproduct of a good analyst relations program, not the be all and end all of it. And by that, I mean, you've got these industry experts that are out there speaking to customers every single day about your market, about companies like you. So yeah, it's good that once every 2 years they think of you and they put you in that quadrant. But if you're meeting with those people on a monthly, bi-weekly basis and having an ongoing dialogue with those, it's much more valuable that then they're out there recommending you. They're out there, they're actually coming to you to ask questions. That through having a good program and a good relationship with analysts, I've actually helped shape what that quadrant ends up looking like. They come to us and say, hey, we're not sure if we should be including this. Is a customer's asking you about this, or this? And then we actually get a chance to shape into the methodology of the quadrant. And that would only come through those ongoing conversations. So I think for me, that's the most important thing. It's if, and this can only really happen if you're investing in a seat with these firms. And if you are, you're probably spending, anywhere probably around the 100,000 a year mark to have a decent seat with one of those firms. And the number of companies I've been at that are spending that money and not speaking to them, not using it, is staggering.
Yeah.
So I think, if any of your listeners are investing in a seat and they're not speaking to someone monthly and not, they're good to go and get information. Hey, we're thinking of entering this market. We're thinking of this region. We're not sure what our competitors are doing that we're not. That's all really valuable. But actually those higher level conversations, hey, can you tell us what you think about our messaging? Can you tell, really getting it so the analyst ideally is coming to you for information, like we're not sure what sort of customers might need a product like yours in this category. You can get them coming to you for questions. It becomes really valuable.
Yeah.
I think the final point, sorry, I've gone on a lot about this. The final point, we have 85% of our inbound inquiries at one company came from a leadership position in a Forrester Wave. So I
It's
mean,
powerful, yeah.
very powerful. It's an immediate validation. And so yeah, get it right, and it's huge. But there's a lot of work that needs to go into it.
Yeah, and the last question was around product market fit, because at the end of the day, you're marketing a market, right? That's the definition of marketing. And where I'm struggling, and I'm a little bit of the Ricky Gervais of sales, right? I like to not like things that are very very mainstream, but I don't see how you can fit into a market that is not static. It's like saying I've bought shoes for my kids and it's gonna stay with his shoes for the foreseeable future. But no, his feet are growing, and like you're gonna have to adapt to some extent. So that's probably the worst analogy in the world of podcasting, but there you go. What's your take on PMF?
I mean, look, I don't know how qualified or intelligent I am to comment on this. I guess that I'll say something that feels like a cliche. A lot of the things I believe in are very, very simple. And I think things can be really overcomplicated. So this is probably going to be a real cliche answer, but for me, it's all about customer needs. That's where it has to start and end. You're solving a challenge for a customer. And so it's easy to get caught up in the competition. It's easy to get caught up. Well, hang on, they've just announced that thing, so we've got to announce that, and then we've got to do this piece of marketing because they're doing that and they're talking about that. I think, being single-minded on the customer and what they need help with and what frustrations they're seeing in their worlds. I think that is where you can move to more of a leadership position where you're not just following, you're not really focused on everyone else that's around you. You're focused on being the best you can for your customers and innovating for their challenges and seeing where that takes you. So again, maybe simplistic and a lot, easy to sit here and say that. It's hard to do, but that for me comes back to that really strong ongoing dialogue with customers that, again, I don't think a lot of brands do well. We won them, we hand them over to customer success, on to the next one, on to the next one. Those brands that are, really nurturing existing customers, doing things like, customer advisory sessions, and have people in place dedicated to listening to customers and finding out what's working and not. I think it's really good for retention, really good for making sure that customers feel valued and understand that you're there for them. But most importantly, I think it really helps develop the future of the company. Does that even come close to answering, or am I in a different world there?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think bottom up in this kind of context makes more sense. Like clients, what is the value that you're buying, and also what the value that you're seeing and getting, and then roll it up to the messaging, right? And I think you're right. Look, we're a very small company, and we are lucky to have Stuart who's looking after the clients. But I think at scale, I don't think we're doing the best job at speaking to the end clients directly often enough. So yeah, definitely. And I can see how being bigger makes it even harder to do. Well, not harder, but I don't know. Like it kind of doesn't take priority sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's customers are, I think customers are so important in so many senses. They're paying the bill, they're paying everyone's salary to start with, but actually the role that they can provide in giving feedback, that thing I just covered about helping make sure that you are solving their challenges, but actually being advocates for a brand. And what better way? There's a handful of really good people that you want talking about how good you are as a customer. One of them is that analyst community that we just covered, but arguably more important is customers. If I'm looking to buy anything, I'm immediately looking to what their customers are saying about that brand. In the same way as if I'm going to a restaurant, I'll definitely take a recommendation of a friend over an advert or a write-up in a paper or something. So I think customers are so important. Now, I think the thing to get right is there needs to be value for that customer in engaging with you in any way, whether that's turning up to an advisory event, whether that's giving you feedback or taking a survey, or at the higher end of the scale, creating a video or a testimonial that you can use to go and sell. And so I think that's the thing that a lot of companies get wrong. They really try and draw on their customers, and they make it all about them. Hey, can you do this for us? Can you do that? Where I think, the most important thing is, what are you trying to achieve? How can we help you? And, potentially, look, we want to use you as a testimony for our brand, but we will help you with your brand. We'll get your, but off the back of that, we're going to give you value from our marketing engine and from our PR activity that will help you elevate your brand. So we'll help you tell your story in the same process. And a simple thing like that can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a question about, I guess, measuring success when it comes to communications that are external facing. So in my mind, external facing communication is around two different aspects when you strip it down. It's brand awareness and it's revenue generating, right? So how can we increase the awareness of our brand, and how can we turn this into pounds, dollars, euros? How do you measure success when the two are quite different, right? For me, I feel like brand awareness is quite difficult to measure. I know, but I heard of terms like share of voice as an example, and I don't fully understand it. But I've heard of this term before, but it always changes every time I speak to someone about it. And then the pounds or the dollars or whatever it is a little bit easier. But even that, because there's so much messaging that could theoretically be going out, how do you know where you attribute the success?
Yeah. I'm gonna have to be careful here. I could talk about this. I could talk about this forever. I took a long
Should
time.
I should have had a new episode.
Yeah. Well, I've just I'm doing a lot about measurement. We just put out a report last week around the value of measuring comms. So there is a whole 48-page guide on this. I'm not a sales pitch, but there's a lot of information I've got. If any of your viewers or if you guys want to see
Yeah,
more,
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
kind of I guess a handful of principles. One that you didn't mention, but I think the biggest one that on the other side, the people who are doing the communication fall foul of, I always look at three things: output, engagement, and outcome.
Hmm.
Output is what we did. So, yeah, we released 7 press releases last month. We put out 40 social media posts. We ran 12 town halls last year. Whatever the thing, it's kind of a lot of communicators get caught up in measuring what they've done.
Hmm.
And that's nothing. That shows they've been busy, but that doesn't show anything.
Yeah.
The next thing is the engagement. So that's cool. Of those press releases, we got this amount of coverage, or, we ran this meeting and this many people came and they gave us feedback and they really enjoyed the meeting, employees or our investors, 80% of them dialed into the earnings call and we got 66 questions. That's kind of the engagement piece. That's good. That's where you get the realms of coverage and the number of PR people that just say, hey, yeah, we got 12 bits of coverage last month, and then they go off to do the next one. Again, it means nothing. But it's an indicator that the outputs are resonating. So then we get to the final bit, outcome. And that's the big one. So what? Those people turned up to the meeting and those media outlets publish your story, those investors ask questions. What does that actually mean? And that's the outcome. And for me, that's the hardest thing to measure, but the most important thing to measure. So I'll park that as a concept there. I think the other kind of headline, which would get us in the realms of your question, is aligning it to business objectives. So aligning any comms activity, you have to do it for a purpose. And again, that sounds so obvious. I just posted on LinkedIn today actually about the first PR project I ever inherited, and it was for they'd done a load of work and spent a load of money on something that was this kind of weird product line in the business that no one was really interested in selling. And so they'd done a whole program, spent a load of money on something that wasn't aligned to the business. And that happens quite a lot, more than you would think or expect. And so in terms of that, there's probably going to be a different communications play for brand awareness than there will be for that return on investment, sales activation work. And it's, you would approach those two from different way. You'd use different tactics, different messaging, and different methodologies to measure as well. So for the brand awareness, I think there's a number of, so that's really just ultra top of the funnel before, even when you look at typical funnel with awareness at the top, are they aware of offerings and who you are? There might be a big one. Are they aware of the category? Do they even kind of know that? Do they even realize they have this challenge in their lives? And then that would then move down to, once they understand that, do they know who your brand are and the problems you solve? So yeah, there are a number of ways that you can measure that. Things like share of voice that you talked about are key. So of anyone who's talking about our brand or any coverage that we get, what percentage of that had our name in it? But there's a load of things that will give you some sort of indicator. I built a brand scorecard that looked at the top, it's high level awareness. Then in the middle, it was around performance, and then the bottom is around sentiment. But some of the awareness stuff you do need to do research for. We did an annual research program. Like, have you, that would get you unaided, aided awareness, messaging alignment and all of that. That's an investment to do properly, and it's not available to everyone. There's a load of things in the middle of that table, brand performance, that I think help with brand awareness, that any company that is any company has access to. So, direct web searches. How many people go into Google and type www.jointflows.com.uk? How many people go into Google and type Jointflows? People need to know your brand to be searching for you. So if you can see an uptick in that, you can assume that there's more brand awareness for you. Web traffic. So there's a whole load of kind of performance indicators that you can see to understand that a brand is conceivably knowing more about you. I'd say that the one that there's most noise around and that seems to be one of the best indicators of that is share of search. And again, that's available to everyone. That is how many people search for you against your competitors. So that's work done by Les Binet some time back, but that has created a direct correlation between share of search and market share, and as a leading indicator. So put simply, if a brand sees its share of search go up, there's almost a direct correlation that the market share will go up in the same, following that, anywhere between 6 and 12 months. And in the same, you see that share of search fall, you see that market share search. And he did it in consumer electronics, he did it in automotive and healthcare, I think. But LG was a great example that they saw this sustained increase in share of search, and they saw that market share come up. And then for some reason, I don't know why, the share of search dropped off a cliff, and so did their market share. And he saw that correlation in almost every instance. So I'd say that one indicator of brand awareness, if you can track your share of search, and if you see an increase in that, then you can equate that to an increase in market share in the future.
Nice.
I think on the other side, the kind of linking stuff to income and revenue, that's where you're looking at the more digital route. So, social media is a very easy and important indicator of that, where, as a social media manager, you shouldn't be reporting, engagements, likes and shares. You should be reporting traffic to, referral traffic to website. You should be able to actually attribute leads in your pipeline to social activity. Not that hard to do. PR is PR's come on a long way in terms of that. Sorry, I told you I could talk for ages. I'll finish. PR used to be, hey, we got in the ... we got in the Times or Bathrooms Monthly, you name the publication. We got there and great. And then the CEO would be like, so what does that mean? Well, so what? Now, digital PR is a relatively new-ish thing, or becoming much more known. And if I was to sum it up really quickly, it's about, you do a really interesting data-led story. X% of sellers say that this, something that is interesting to a journalist and interesting to their audience. But importantly, you keep a bunch of that data on your website and you give them the headlines. So that journalist will cover your story, but they will then link to your website. Once you get that backlink in, that does a number of things. First of all, you're going to get the authority of the publication. So that's going to, if more publications or more good websites are pointing to your website, it's going to increase your domain authority. It's going to help you appear in more searches. But importantly, it's going to drive traffic to your website that you can measure. And again, importantly, you can see in that attribution, oh, we had all of these people come through this unique link that was in publication. So that allows you to get very forensic about measuring the impact of the communications efforts.
Amazing. Well, that's been really insightful, Steve. We are just about out of time, however. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I know myself, I've learned heaps during this episode, so I'm sure our listeners have as well. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast, brought to you by Jointflows. Until next time, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.